Hey guys, it's Austin with Out Jeeping. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to install a transmission gauge and temperature sensor. Today, we'll be doing it on my Jeep right behind me. Alright, so the transmission temperature gauge we got today is made by GlowShift. As you can see, this one is pretty universal. It has 7 different colors to match your interior lights or your cluster lights. It also has a function of multi-color function, so it changes different colors as you're going along. And that can be controlled by the little light that's on the gauge. Now, along with this transmission temperature gauge, it actually comes with a temperature sending unit. And it has a threaded portion on here, so you can either plug this right into your transmission, or you're going to have to get a couple adapters to plug it into a line, which is what I'm going to be doing today. Now, this thread on here is 1/8 NPT, so make sure you know what adapter you have to get if you're plugging it into your transmission. Alright, so inside this box with the transmission temperature gauge, we have all of our wiring and hardware. As you can see, the gauge is right here. It's nice and blacked out when it's shut off. Now we got this wiring harness that's included. I already taken this out of the bags and stuff, but it's a lot more neater. We also have some hardware, so we can flush mount it into the dashboard or anywhere where you want to put it. Then we also have this little angled bezel. We can add that if you want to put it up on an angle so it's easier to see. We also got some little adapters for our wiring. I'm not a big fan of these connectors. I'll probably just be replacing them with normal spade connectors. Then we got some instructions showing how to wire this up. And then we got our temperature setting unit right here. And a couple other things I needed to buy since I was tapping this into my transmission line is I have a T fitting right here along with 2 barb fittings on the end. So basically our transmission line is going to pass right through. And right here we have our transmission temperature sensor that's going to tap right in. Now I ordered a fitting for this, so it goes from 1/8 to 3/8 into this T fitting right here, but for some reason Amazon messed up and false advertised, so I had to get another adapter at the store, but they didn't have the right one, so I actually have 1/8 to 1/4 to 3/8. So that's why I got an extra adapter right here. Should work just fine, though when we go to start this up and install it, I want to make sure I shake this around in case there's any air bubbles trapped up in this little area. Because I will be installing this in my Jeep where the temperature sensor is facing straight up. So I got to make sure I rattle this around when the Jeep's running just to get any air bubbles that might be trapped up in there. A couple other things what you might need is maybe some longer line if you're putting this in a different area. I'm going to be kind of attaching this to the cross section of the frame just behind it on the Jeep, so that way it doesn't rattle around because this is actually quite heavy. So I'll put like a little rubber isolator and then zip tie it into place so it's not moving around. So I just got some extra 3/8 hose right here. Along with that, with this fitting, you're going to need some Teflon tape. That way you can make sure that these joints are nice and secure and they don't leak at all. And then you're obviously going to need a couple hose clamps. Now over the summer, if you recall, I made a video on installing a transmission cooler, so this will really see how efficient my transmission cooler is. So I'm going to be tapping this into the return line of the transmission, so this is going to be the fluid that after it goes to the radiator and external transmission cooler. Then we'll see what temperature the transmission fluid is going back into the transmission. Alright, so I'm going to start off with putting Teflon tape on all these male connectors that go into our T-fitting. And I'm basically just going to be using some Teflon tape and putting it over all these threaded portions. So then you want to make sure you put this on the right way, so when you're threading it into the T fitting, it doesn't unravel on you. And we're probably just going to do 2 or 3 layers of Teflon tape. That should be plenty. Alright, that should be good for that, and I'll do it to the rest. Alright, so I got all my male fittings with Teflon tape. Now we can just screw this into place. I can start with the 3/8 barb fitting and start to thread it in. Now this is going to be a 11/16 in size. It's as tight as I can get it with my hand, so I'm going to put the other one on so that way we can get a wrench on the other side. So this doesn't have to be crazy tight, but tight enough so that it creates a good seal with that Teflon tape. Now we can take in our adapter and thread it into the other side. This is also going to be an 11/16. Then our second adapter, which is going to be a 9/16. Alright, there's good. And then lastly, our temperature sensor. And that's also going to be a 9/16. Alright, so that's tight enough, and we're going to put this into the Jeep now, and if there's going to be any leaks, basically you just want to tighten this down even more, or if that doesn't work, you're going to take that off and put some more Teflon tape on there to create a better seal. So we'll go under the Jeep right now and find out where we're going to put this. Alright, so I'm underneath the front end of the Jeep, and as you can see, the bottom of the radiator is right where my hand is. Now we got two transmission lines right here. One of them comes from the transmission and one of them returns to the transmission. Now the adapters on the transmission, the one that goes all the way to the rear is going to be our return line. So that's the line that I'm going to be tapping into. And that line happens to be this one right here where my finger is. So as you can see, I already have union barb fittings on both of these because that's where I spliced to put in my cooler. I don't want to put it necessarily right here because that T-fitting has a lot of weight to it and I don't want it, jiggling around at all. So I'm actually thinking about putting it over here and then using that T-fitting to zip tie against this front plate right here. And I'm also going to be putting a rubber isolator in between that so that way it's not going to be rattling around. So basically I'm going to need to be cutting this line once again in a different spot, and it's going to be right here. And I noticed that this little portion is going to be too short because it has to wrap around and go, directly that way into the union fitting. So I basically just going to have a longer piece right here, which I have some extra 3/8 hose to do that for, and then it should slide right in from this side. So this is what I came up with as rubber isolators for this T-fitting. Basically just took some 5/8 holes and split it down the middle and fit this one on top. That way when I zip tied to this front cross member piece, it won't rattle around at all. So I can basically take a few zip ties here, here, and here, and it should not move at all. As far as wiring, I went and put some spade connectors on there because I didn't like the connectors that came with the kit. And what we're basically going to do for wiring this up is the black wire is going to go straight to ground. So you can either ground it right where the thing is going to be located. I'm actually going to take the ground and put it where my main ground is, up towards the battery. And then we can take the other white wire, which you got this spool for, and we're going to route this all the way up to where you're going to mount your transmission gauge. Now I'm going to mount my transmission gauge right where the shifter is on the center console. So I'm going to run this all the way in the cab. So I'm going to go and install this into place. Alright, so this is how I have everything all set up. I got the output over there connecting to the T-fitting, and then I have a new segment of hose I made, which is just about a few inches longer, and that goes into the connection back here where the original union fitting was. And that goes to the return line of the transmission. So everything is all set up. I got some hose clamps on here, and I'm actually going to go and start up the Jeep right now, have the transmission fluid circulate a little bit, check for leaks before I go and zip tie this back into place. Now along with that, I'm just going to add a little bit of transmission fluid because when I had this line apart, a little bit came out and drained out. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. And then I'll also jiggle this around a little bit as the Jeep is running in case there is any air bubbles that are trapped up where the sensor is. Alright, so that is the final result of the temperature switch in place. I just got it zip tied down and it's not going anywhere. It's nice and firm. As you can see, I got the wires already connected up here, and I ran them across the front of this crossmember piece all the way up into the engine bay by the battery. Now from in the engine bay here, we can see where it splits off right here. I got this all nice and loomed up, but over here it's going to connect to the battery, which is the black wire coming out of the temperature switch, so that goes straight to ground. Now I got the other wire going all the way over here through the firewall grommet down here on the passenger side. Might be kind of hard to see back there, but I got the wire coming through the firewall and it runs all along up here into the center console. And that's where I have the wire. And now we can start to wire in the new transmission gauge. Alright, so I've decided that I'm going to mount my transmission temperature gauge right down here in this little area where it's nice and flat. I've seen other people do it online, and there's plenty of room back there where you can get this recessed in and have a nice flush mount. Now, most of the time when you're off-roading your rig, you're usually going to be in 4 low, and in that case, you can actually see this temperature gauge right from where you're sitting perfectly without this lever being in the way. Now, it does cover it up a little bit when you're in 2-wheel drive. It's not a big deal for me. If it's for you, I mean, you can mount it anywhere you want, but right here seems to be the place I'm going to put it. So basically, to cut that hole out, I'm actually going to remove this whole center console. I'm not going to show you that. But it's pretty easy. You take off these bezels. There's a couple screws under here, and then inside the box there's going to be a couple Phillips screws. Basically, I'm going to pull that out. I'm going to cut that hole out. Either if you have a hole saw, that would be ideal. I don't think I have one, so I'll just be doing it with a knife and filing it out and making it nice and round for the gauge to fit in. Alright, so I went and got the hole drilled, and I found out that the best way of doing it, well, at least for me, was just to use a 2-inch hole saw. Now, it is going to be actually a little bit looser in the hole. As you can see, there's a little bit of wiggle room, but that's all right because we got a retaining bracket that goes on the back here that screws into this, and that bracket looks like that. Then it should hold it into the dash piece right here. Alright, so what I'm going to do is take this gauge and mount it right away. When it's outside the Jeep, it'll be a lot easier since you can get from the back side, tighten up this bracket. Then I'm also going to put this wire harness in right away. And so when we put this whole center console back into the Jeep, I'm basically going to have these wires stick out the top, and that way it should go into the center console where all the other switches are, and that's where we're going to make all of our splice connections to hook all of these wires up. Alright, so I got the center console back in, and it went in nice and smoothly, and I got our wiring harness coming out of the top. Basically just goes over the lip of this plastic panel right here, and basically we're going to make all of our connections right in here, and a lot of our wires are actually just going to be splicing into the existing wiring harness, and I'll show you which wires you can use in the Jeep Cherokee. So basically we got 5 wires coming from our gauge. Now our green wire is actually going to go right into the wire that we drew in the cab earlier that goes right to the temperature sensor. So basically we're just going to connect that to that wire down there. And now our red wire right here, this is our ignition wire. So basically every time you turn on the ignition, you want the gauge to turn on because you don't want it on all the time. So we're going to splice that into probably one of the cigarette lighters. On the driver's side cigarette lighter, basically that comes on whenever the ignition's on. So I'm going to splice that one into this one over here. So our yellow wire right here is going to be our constant positive. So we're going to splice that into the right side cigarette lighter because that's always going to be a live wire, so that's just going to splice right into there. And then obviously we have a black right here, so we can splice that into any ground from either side cigarette lighter. And this orange wire right here controls the backlight for the gauge, so whenever your headlights are on, all of your cluster lights come on, and you want to splice this into that system. Now on our switch panel right here that I took off, on the factory switches for the defrost and wiper, they have 2 plugs back here, and these 2 plugs actually have an orange wire, and I've looked this up a while ago, but the orange wire is actually for your cluster lights, so you can splice this right into it. So it's actually nicely color coded, so orange goes to orange, and you basically just want to splice it in. So I'm going to go wire this up, and I'll show you what it looks like all done. Alright, so I got everything wired in. As you can see, I used the yellow wire for the constant positive. That's spliced in right there. Over here I have the orange spliced in with the orange over here for the cluster lights. Over here I have the ignition wire, basically, that goes to the cigarette lighter on the driver's side. Then I got the ground spliced in. And then lastly, I have the green wire spliced into the black wire, which I use to go all the way to the temperature switch on the transmission line. So if we go and we hit the ignition, put it forward, as you can see, it lights up. So I'm going to go finish this all up and button up all the wires. Alright, so everything's put back together and we'll test it out. Alright, so as you can see, it works pretty nice. I'm going to take it for a test drive in a little bit. But as you can see, there's a bunch of different color options, and then there's one that changes colors. But for me, I'm just going to leave it at turquoise because that's what matches the rest of my cluster lights up here. So I'll take it for a test drive and see what temps we got. Taking it down the road. It's about 33 degrees right now, so it's going to get, a lot slower to heat up the transmission. Alright, so I've driven this thing to the gas station and back, so it's about like 10 minutes, and this thing takes a while to warm up, but as you can see, it is working. It's only about like 95 degrees right now, which is still pretty cool. I'll have to see how it does when wheeling on a hot summer day, but for right now, that's what it's at, so at least we know it works. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. As you can see, it wasn't too hard of an install, but it's just, time consuming with all the wiring and stuff like that. I'll make sure to post in the description below on where you can find all the parts I used in this video. And if you have any questions, make sure to comment below and I'll be happy to answer. So make sure to like and subscribe to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel to help keep these videos coming, and I'll see you guys in the next video.